I was 19 years old the night the King of Thornwick broke his own law, and I was standing close enough to hear him whisper the reason. My name is Tomas Bayan, third week on the gate, 22 days in the uniform if you want the honest number because I was counting. Everybody counts at the start. You stop around day 40 when your feet go numb and the counting stops helping. Greymore Palace sits at the top of Ashford Row and the whole street slopes down away from it, so from the gate you can see the city laid out like something spilled. Gray roofs, chimney smoke, the river past all of it, flat and brown. That night it was raining, not proper rain, the other kind, the kind that doesn't fall so much as it just hangs in the air and gets into your collar. The crowd started small. 20 people maybe, standing across the road under the awnings of the cloth sellers, the way people do when they don't want to admit they're waiting for something. By 8 o'clock there were hundreds. By 10 I stopped trying to count. Visitors had come up from the coast that week for the harvest fair, and half of them were still in the city, families, children on shoulders, old men who'd walked from the eastern parishes with their hats in their hands. Somebody had brought a dog. It sat in a puddle and didn't bark once, which I remember thinking was strange because dogs bark at us. They always bark at us. The brass on the uniform, maybe, or the standing still. That dog just sat there and watched the palace windows. Everyone did. Because 2 of the windows on the 3rd floor had been lit for 11 straight nights, and everybody in Thornwick knew whose rooms those were. King Aldrich was 81 years old. He'd been on the throne since before my father was born, and 2 winters back, his only son had gone into the water off Marrow Point trying to pull 3 fishermen out of a wreck. Prince Corwin, 34. They got the fisherman, they didn't get him. I was 17 when it happened. I remember the bells going all day and nobody saying anything at supper. After that the king stopped coming to the balcony, stopped riding. There were rumors he'd stopped speaking altogether for a season, though I never believed those. People love a rumor with a silence in it. What everyone did know was what the law said. Thornwick's succession went by blood, direct blood. No son, no daughter, the crown crossed sideways to the king's brother, which meant Duke Havard. And nobody wanted Duke Havard. I want to be careful here, because I was 19 and I believed whatever the men beside me believed. But Havard had a face like a closed door, and in 11 days of the king dying, he'd come to the palace exactly twice. Both times by the side entrance. Both times with 4 of his own men, who wore his colors and not the king's, and who looked at us on the gate like we were furniture. The other one, the one nobody could work out, was the Lady Isolde, Corwin's widow. She'd been a physician's daughter from Halloway, not a drop of noble blood in her, and the whole court had nearly come apart when Corwin married her. There were songs about it, cruel ones mostly. After Corwin drowned, everyone expected her to go home. She didn't. She stayed in the palace and she nursed the old man. 2 years of it. I'd seen her myself, 3 or 4 times, crossing the courtyard before dawn with her sleeves pushed up and her hair tied back like a working woman's, carrying a basin, not looking at anybody. The court barely spoke to her. The servants adored her. That's usually all you need to know about a person. At 10:30, a physician came running out of the east door, ran straight across the wet cobbles in his slippers. Sergeant Wheel was on the gate with me, 26 years in. He didn't turn his head, didn't move a muscle. But I heard him breathe out through his nose, very slow. And he said, quiet enough that only I caught it, "Steady, lad." That's when I knew. At 11, the chapel bell rang. Once. Just once and then nothing. The whole street went silent, not gradually, all at once like a hand had come down over the city. Because a single bell means summons, 3 means death, and nobody could work out what a single bell was doing at that hour on that night when everyone had spent 11 days waiting for 3. Behind me I heard the courtyard come alive. Boots, doors, somebody dropping something metal and swearing. Then the lamps started going on in the lower windows, room by room, in a line, like something walking through the palace. The crowd across the road moved forward, just a few steps, but hundreds of people moving a few steps makes a sound, and that sound is not a nice one. Wheel didn't move. Old Marsh at the far post didn't move. So I didn't move. That's the thing nobody understands about the gate. People think the discipline is about the king. It isn't. It's about the crowd. On a normal day, the stillness is theater, something for the visitors to laugh at, to take pictures beside, to try and make you blink. On a night like that, the stillness is the only thing standing between a frightened city and a stampede. If we move, they run. So we don't move. The side gate opened, and Duke Havard came through it. 4 men behind him, wet cloaks, fast walking. He went up the palace steps 2 at a time, which is not how a man walks toward a deathbed. It's how a man walks toward a room he intends to leave differently than he entered. Old Marsh's jaw went tight. That was all, just the jaw. Havard reached the top step and stopped and turned and looked out at the crowd, all those people standing in the rain in the dark, and I watched him take it in, the size of it, what it meant. Then he went inside. And 10 minutes later the great doors opened, both of them. They hadn't opened in 2 years. What came through them first was a chair, 4 men carrying it, walking so carefully it looked like they were carrying water. The king was in it. I'd never seen him up close. He was small. That was the first thing. All my life he'd been the enormous stern face on the coins, and he was small, wrapped in blankets, hands folded on top like they'd been arranged there. Walking beside the chair, one hand on the armrest, was Lady Isolde. She was in gray, no jewelry. Her hair had come loose on one side and she hadn't fixed it. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week because she hadn't. And walking behind them a step too close was Duke Havard, saying something, leaning down, saying it again. The king didn't look at him. They set the chair down at the top of the steps in the light, where the whole street could see. 10,000 people stopped breathing at once. I know because I heard it. There's a sound a crowd makes when it stops making sound. The rain kept coming down, that soft hanging rain, and it settled on the blankets and on the old man's white hair, and nobody moved to cover him. He lifted one hand, barely got it off the blanket. The crowd knelt. All of them, all the way down Ashford Row, in the wet, in the dark. The fair visitors, the coast families, the old men from the east. The dog stayed sitting in its puddle. Havard stepped forward, chin up, ready. And King Aldrich turned his head slow, like it cost him everything he had left, and he did not look at his brother. He looked at the woman standing beside his chair. And he said, "Isolde." He was too weak to shout, so the herald had to say it after him, line by line into the rain. The king spoke, the herald repeated. And the whole city listened to a dying man's voice come out of a young man's mouth. He said he had written a confession. He said that for 2 years he had let the law of Thornwick stand between him and the truth, because he was a coward, and because grief had made him obedient. He said the law spoke of blood. He said blood was the smallest thing a person could give you. He said this woman, this physician's daughter from Holloway, this woman his court had laughed at, this woman whose name he had not spoken aloud for the first 6 months after his son drowned because he could not stand what it reminded him of, this woman had washed him and fed him and sat with him through nights when he had begged God to take him, and had never once, not one single time, asked him for anything. He said she stayed. And then he said everyone else went home. Then he named her heir. I have never heard a sound like the one that came off that street. It wasn't cheering. It was too torn open for cheering. It was thousands of people making noise at the same time for completely different reasons, some of them weeping, some of them shouting yes and some of them, plenty of them, shouting other things. Because it wasn't legal, everybody knew it wasn't legal. Havard's men came down 2 steps, and somebody in the crowd threw a stone. I don't know who. I've thought about it for 11 years and I still don't know, and I've stopped wanting to. It was a river stone, smooth, about the size of a fist, and it came out of the dark on the left side, and it was going at her head. Here's the part I have to explain properly. We are not permitted to break the line. Not for weather, not for insult, not for a crowd pressing. There are men in that regiment who have stood while people spat on their boots and screamed in their faces and did not so much as shift their weight. I broke the line. I don't remember deciding to. I remember the noise, and I remember moving, and then I was on the steps with my back to the crowd, and the stone hit me above the ear. It didn't knock me down. I wish I could tell you it did. Better story. It just rang like being inside a bell, and I felt something warm start down the side of my neck. And then I did the only thing I knew how to do. I stood still, face front, heels together, blood coming down into my collar, 19 years old with a stone cut over my ear, standing between 10,000 people and a woman in a gray dress. Behind me I heard her say, "Oh no," and start to move toward me because that's what she was, a physician's daughter, somebody bleeding in front of her. And Sergeant Wheel, 26 years, never broken formation in his life. Sergeant Wheel brought his rifle up and saluted her. Then Marsh did. Then the men at the doors and the men on the wall and the men at the courtyard arch, all the way back into the dark where I couldn't see, that sound rolling backwards through the palace like a wave going the wrong way up a beach. Havard stood there on the steps and watched it happen. Then he put his hands behind his back and he bowed, and he walked down into the crowd and out of the city, and Thornwick never saw him again. Nobody threw anything else. The rain kept coming down. And Isolde, who was queen now, who had been queen for about 40 seconds and clearly had no idea what to do with it, Isolde didn't wave, didn't speak, didn't look at the crowd at all. She knelt down beside the chair, in the wet in her gray dress, and she took the old man's hand in both of hers, and she put her forehead against it. He died before dawn. The bell rang 3 times, and this time nobody was surprised. I've told this story a lot of times. There's a scar over my ear and people always ask about it, and once they've asked, they always ask the same next question. They ask what a crown looks like. They want gold, they want velvet and jewels and a hall full of trumpets. I tell them the truth. It looks like a woman on her knees in the rain, holding a dying man's hand, while 10,000 people stand in the dark and don't dare to breathe.